Your attention span is so fried by short-form garbage that I'm going to explain a military intervention, a dictator, drug trafficking, and the world's biggest oil reserves using cats. Because apparently that's the only way your brain still processes geopolitics. January 3, 2026, the Orange Cat from the U.S. launched a military operation in Venezuela and captured Nicolás Maduro, removing him from power and flying him to the United States to face criminal charges. Yes, the cat running the house was dragged out of his own backyard by a foreign military operation. And immediately, Washington gave several reasons: security, drug trafficking, Maduro's regime, national interests, all very noble-sounding words. But then you look at what's sitting underneath Venezuela: oil, a ridiculous amount of oil. Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves. And after Maduro was removed, the American government wasn't just watching Venezuela's oil industry from across the fence. It started taking control of the flow of Venezuelan oil revenues. By August, the U.S. had seized or controlled oil tankers connected to sanctioned Venezuelan exports, while American authorities were involved in managing billions of dollars in oil revenue. Now, here's where everybody gets uncomfortable. Because Washington can say, "We're here to fight drugs." Okay, then let's look at the drug problem itself. The United States is one of the world's biggest drug markets, and the UN says North America has the highest levels of use for many major drugs, including cannabis and several other substances. The U.S. also has an enormous domestic overdose crisis. The DEA itself reports that Mexican criminal organizations supply major parts of the illicit fentanyl market in the United States, with deadly fentanyl driving massive numbers of drug poisoning deaths. So here's the question: if the real priority is stopping drugs, why does the response so often focus on other countries while the biggest consumer market remains right here? That's the part politicians hate. Because maybe this isn't really about drugs alone. Maybe drugs are one justification, maybe security is another, and maybe sitting underneath all of it is the giant black cat nobody wants to talk about: oil. Now, to be fair, saying the entire intervention happened only to steal Venezuela's oil goes further than the evidence proves. Geopolitics is uglier than a single explanation, but you don't need to be a genius to notice what happened after the intervention. Maduro is gone. Washington has enormous influence over Venezuela's oil exports. American companies are getting opportunities to return to the Venezuelan energy sector, and Venezuela's oil production is increasingly flowing toward the U.S. market. Reuters reported that U.S.-bound Venezuelan oil shipments reached about 786,000 barrels per day in July 2026, their highest level since early 2019. And suddenly the neighborhood has a lot more American interest in fixing that broken oil pipeline. Funny how that works. The international community spent years arguing about Venezuela's political crisis. Now, suddenly everybody is very interested in making the oil industry work again. And no, your brain-damaged geography skills haven't changed the map. Venezuela is still in South America. It still has enormous oil reserves, and ordinary Venezuelans still have to live with the consequences of decades of political collapse, economic disaster, sanctions, underinvestment, and now foreign intervention. Because here's the thing nobody puts on the propaganda poster: oil doesn't magically become healthcare. Oil doesn't automatically become decent schools. Oil doesn't become food because it exists underground. Someone has to control the money, someone has to sign the contracts, someone has to decide which companies get access, and someone gets very rich when billions of dollars begin moving again. That's where the real fight starts, not over the barrel, over the cash register attached to the barrel. And let's stop pretending ordinary people are going to capture most of that wealth. The average cat isn't sitting in a private jet waiting for its share of Venezuela's oil revenue. The people positioned to benefit most are governments, major energy companies, investors, political networks and wealthy elites with the capital and connections to access those opportunities. You get the privilege of watching it happen while your rent goes up. And before you start typing angry comments, hit like and follow Paws of War. There. Now back to the oil circus, because there is another layer to this. The U.S. isn't just interested in selling Venezuelan oil. It also wants political influence over what happens next. The post-Maduro government, led by interim President Delcy Rodriguez, has been negotiating with Washington over political reforms, sanctions, and future elections. So now America isn't merely saying, here's what we want from your oil. It's also saying, here's what your political future should look like. And that is where intervention becomes something much bigger than a military operation. It's economic power, political power, energy power, regional power. Basically, the orange cat didn't just jump the fence. It jumped the fence and started asking who owns the food warehouse. And maybe that's the most cynical lesson here. Countries talk about democracy, they talk about security, they talk about fighting drugs, they talk about protecting human rights. But when a nation happens to sit on one of the largest oil reserves on Earth, everyone suddenly discovers an extremely passionate interest in its future. And who's paying for all of this? Not the billionaire sitting comfortably behind another locked gate, not the oil executive, not the politician giving the speech. You, the ordinary cat, you pay for the military, you pay for the political machinery, you pay for the economic consequences, and then you get told, don't worry, at least you have an iPhone. Congratulations, you have a smartphone. You can order food you may not be able to afford while watching billionaires fight over energy reserves on a screen you are still paying monthly for. Meanwhile, Venezuela is sitting on enough oil to make half the planet salivate. And the cats at the top are already fighting over who gets the can opener. That's the real tragedy. The country has enormous natural wealth. But natural wealth means almost nothing to the cat who can't afford dinner. So the next time some politician tells you a foreign intervention is purely about security, democracy, or fighting drugs, look at the map, then look underground, then follow the money. Because sometimes the biggest clue isn't what the government says it wants, it's what becomes available after the shooting stops. Subscribe to Paws of War, you tiny geopolitical hairball, because the Venezuelan cat may have lost its old dictator. But the fight over who owns the food bowl is far from over. And while the biggest cats fight over oil fields, contracts, and billions, you're counting coins for a fish-flavored leftover pouch. The elites keep the oil. The politicians keep the speeches. The corporations keep the contracts. And you get the receipt.